the Bible has raised all kinds of questions and of problems to scholars of all ages. From the philological point of view, the sacred text of Jews and Christians presents a particular instability. There are all versions of the same books written in different languages, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and so on, but there are also different manifestations of the same, both written or printed, of the same books in the same language. This is what has been called the multiplicity of scripture. And this multiplicity has caused violent tensions in the relationship between theology and philology. One of the episodes that best illustrates this sort of tensions is the reception of the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp, the most important edition of the Bible in the 16th century. Around this Bible, two very opposing networks of scholars clashed again. On the one hand, the strict defenders of the Vulgate, who attacked this edition violently. On the other hand, the Hebraists, who claimed the value of the original languages, the original manuscript, Hebrew manuscript of the Bible, even to correct the Vulgate in those cases that needed revision. One of the clearest testimonies that I have read on this deep controversy comes from the pen of the Spanish Jesuit Juan de Mariana, who in 1609 wrote the following at the beginning of his treatise Pro Editione Vulgata. Let's translate from Latin into English the first paragraph. I don't know if there has been any controversy in the previous years among theologians, mainly in Spain, that has developed with greater warmth of characters and passion. The second paragraph summarizes the real conflict between the two parts. In fact, some attack the Vulgate edition as if it were deformed by many mistakes, frequently turning to the sources from where these rivers came to us and arguing that it seems that it must be corrected with the collation of the Greek and Hebrew manuscripts as many times as it disagrees with them. On the opposite side, others of greater number, with hatred for their adversaries, consider it illegal to handle the Vulgate edition and judge impious those who try to correct the slightest word. This text was written 32 years after the inquisitorial process against the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp and its director-in-chief, Benito Arias Montano, an inquisitorial process in which Mariana himself acted as a censor or informant. The passage provides the necessary starting context for my presentation. The main circumstances of the reception of the Polyglot Bible can be followed thanks to an extensive bibliography dating back to the 19th century. But many pieces, many documents are still missing in order to be able to reconstruct the complete mosaic, the complete puzzle of the reception of the Polyglot Bible. The aim of my talk is to present some new letters, some new documents I have published on this question in the recent years, and to show how these opponent networks created and increased their arguments by following the paradigm of action of the Republic of Letters. And to begin with, let us review the main chronological milestones of this controversy. First, we have to go back to the year 1546, fourth session of the Council of Trent, where the decree De Editione et Usu Sacrorum Librorum was promulgated. This decree placed the Vulgate above all the other Latin translations of the Bible and was a severe reverse for the Hebraists who claim the necessity to check the Hebrew original text of the Bible, even to correct the Vulgate. On the contrary, the decree made stronger the position of a sector of the biblical philology of the moment that only gave authority to the Septuagint and to the Vulgate on the grounds that the Jews had corrupted the Hebrew and Greek original biblical texts in order to obscure the mysteries of the Christian faith. Between 1569 and 1573, the presses of Christopher Plantin published the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp, edited by the most prominent Hebraist scholars of the 16th century. In 1568, Benito Arias Montano had been appointed as supervisor of the editorial project. That same year, he arrived in Antwerp, and he didn't come back to Spain until 1576, 8 years later. When in 1572 the printing works of the Polyglot were about to finish, Philip II considered it appropriate to obtain the papal approval for the project. But in February, the Spanish ambassador of the king informed that the papal commission raised serious objections against the Polyglot Bible. Arias Montano had to leave for Rome in the summer of 1572, and after complicated diplomatic efforts, he finally obtained the papal permission. The main attacks against the Polyglot Bible came from the professor of Greek at the University of Salamanca, León de Castro. In the second half of 1575, Castro complained about the new Bible to the Holy Office in Rome. And when this attempt failed, in November 1576, he addressed a formal requisition to the Spanish Inquisition Council. Castro's claims could be summarized in two fundamental points. First, that the new Bible included, together with the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Hebraist Sancte Spaniere, which, according to a very radical interpretation of the Decree of Trent, could be understood as a contempt of the Vulgate. The second accusation was the rabbinical nature of some treatises published in the Polyglot. The controversy between Arias Montano and León de Castro was closed, although not completely, by a censorship published, written by the already mentioned Jesuit Juan de Mariana. In the Low Countries, Arias Montano and his Bible suffered persecution from the Bishop of Roermond, Wilhelmus Lindanus. The ultimate reason for this controversy must be sought in a case of defamation, as I will show now. Among the new texts I have published on this question recently, maybe the most important is a set of documents preserved in the Algemeen Rechtsarchief in Brussels. There we find some writings compiled by Lindanus on his dispute with Arias Montano. Thanks to this new documentation, we can reconstruct many important movements and actions of all the networks circulating around the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp. Let us say that the starting point of the disputation between Arias Montano and Lindanus was the treatise De Optimo Scripturas Interpretandi Genere, on the best method on commenting on the scriptures. In that work, Lindanus posed the thesis that many Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible had been corrupted by the Jews. Among his arguments, the bishop praised an old and valuable manuscript, Hebrew manuscript of the Psalter that came from England. As an evidence of the value and antiquity of that old Hebrew manuscript of the Psalter that came from England, the bishop praised that in certain passages, some words were entirely preserved in that old manuscript of the Psalter, but omitted in later Hebrew copies of the Psalter. All this could prove that many of the Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible in the 16th century were corrupted. 11 years later, in the last volume of the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp, Arias Montano wrote a kind of review, a short note titled De Exemplari Psalteri Anglicani Anima Versio, warning on the English manuscript of the Psalter, where he tried to override Lindanus' attacks against the Hebrew manuscript of the Bible. To do so, Ares Montano focused on the manuscript praised by Lindanus, and he concluded it was false for several philological reasons, but the main accusation was as follows. Let us read and translate Montano's words. Then he, Lindanus, quotes a very important passage entirely preserved, as he says, in that Hebrew Psalter, but removed in the rest of Hebrew manuscripts. That is, the 10th verse of Psalm 95. Say among the nations that Lord reigned from the good, from the cross. Lindanus testifies that the phrase aligno, that is the equivalent Hebrew phrase, is preserved in this Hebrew Psalter, but due to the evil of the Jews, the phrase was removed long time ago in later Hebrew copies of the Psalter. We found that copy of the Psalter, Montano found that copy of the Psalter, and finally I went to Psalm 95. There, I not only couldn't find the phrase aligno, but I also missed all the half verse, namely, say among the nations, let Lord reign. I don't know what you think, but it must have been very hard to Lindanus that the most important edition of the Bible of the 16th century casted doubts on his scholarly work. Ares Montano implied that Lindanus stated in his work that the phrase aligno was preserved in a very important Hebrew manuscript of the Psalter. Montano could check it out and see that that phrase was missing in that manuscript as well. All this could lead the readers to two different conclusions. First, that Lindanus could have not seen the manuscript he praised, and then he spoke by hearsay. And second, that Lindanus knew that manuscript very well, and then he would be a liar. In both cases, Lindanus' fame was mortally grounded. It's worth clarifying at this point who of the two scholars was right, at least regarding the quotation of the phrase aligno. And the only way to do it is to confront what Lindano really wrote in his treatise with what Montano denounced in the Polyglot. In chapter 3 of his book, Lindanus refers to a passage from Psalm 13, the passage of the Psalm 13, not Psalm 95, which reads, Sepulchrum patens est utur eorum, their throat is an open sepulchre. A passage preserved entirely in the manuscript of the Hebrew Psalter he praised, but omitted in all printed copies and manuscripts of the Psalter, of the Hebrew Psalter in the 16th century. In chapter 5, Lindanus tries to prove that the distortion of the Hebrew manuscript of the Bible is not limited to small changes of vowels or letters, but even whole sentences are missing there in those manuscripts, Hebrew manuscript of the Bible. To conclude this argument, Lindanus moves on to appreciate the Septuagint. Pay attention that from this line onwards, Lindanus is not dealing with the English manuscript of the Psalter anymore. He's now considering the Septuagint, where one can find many places that are not extant in the Hebrew manuscripts nowadays. A famous example was that of Psalm 95, where the Jews supposedly removed the phrase aligno. So the fact is that Lindanus wrote twice and clearly that the passage preserved in that Hebrew manuscript of the Psalter he praised was a passage of Psalm 13 and not a passage from Psalm 95. Also, he quoted Psalm 95. He only made reference to it as a widely accepted example of the value of the Septuagint that preserved that passage compared to later Hebrew copies of the Psalter. Whether the manuscript praised by Lindanus was true or false, the fact is that Lindanus was right when saying that he didn't state that the Hebrew phrase aligno was preserved in that Hebrew manuscript he praised. The problem, how can we explain what Montano wrote in the Polyglot Bible? I think that Montano read these pages too quickly, didn't pay attention that these two paragraphs referred to the Septuagint and connected erroneously the example of Psalm 95 with the reference to the Psalm 13 made two paragraphs above. The problem is that Lindanus was very good at controversies, and he even threatened Arias Montano to initiate an ecclesiastical process of defamation. And Arias Montano had no choice but to retract on several occasions to avoid that process. Montano even had to change his note, his review, in a second issue of copies of the Polyglot that has produced two different states of the text. Thanks to the new documents preserved in Brussels, we can now reconstruct obscure new chapters of this crucial controversy. The first significant document is a letter from Lindanus to the King Philip II, to the King of Spain Philip II. In this letter, Lindanus wrote hard accusations against the Polyglot Bible and Arias Montano, and urged the king to make swift justice on this controversy. This insistence might have been the cause why in 1579, Philip II and Cardinal Granvelle arranged a meeting between Montano and Lindanus in El Escorial, Spain. In order to consider the controversy finished, Lindanus asked Montano to write a preface for his next work, where he admitted publicly that he didn't tell the truth in the Bible when referring to his book, De Optimo Venere Interpretandi Escrituras. As a matter of fact, Arias Montano wrote that preface. We have seen it in the documentation preserved in Brussels, but that preface was never published, which means that that attempt of making peace was not successful. The new documents preserved in Brussels also show that Lindanus forged dangerous alliances against Arias Montano and the Polyglot Bible. Among the supporters, the bonds, the connections of Lindanus in the Low Countries, there can be found several theologians of the University of Leuven, Johannes Molanus, Henry de Grave, Jacobus Jansonius. And this is quite curious because the University of Leuven always was one of the main protectors of the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp. But the most important alliance is one hitherto unknown to us. There are in Brussels 3 new letters crossed between León de Castro and Guillermus Lindanus. This new correspondence proves that the two networks, the two fronts opposing the Polyglot, the Spanish and the Flemish, at a given time came together and coordinated their activities. I believe that the reception of the Polyglot Bible should be considered as a case study of the Republic of Letters in action. We have seen how the two fronts opposing the Polyglot, represented by Lindano and León de Castro, converged over the years in an European anti-Hebraic network. On the other hand, Arias Montano also managed to assemble two networks, two fronts of defenders of the Polyglot Bible. One in the Low Countries that has left us extensive Latin letters in favor of the Polyglot, written by Johannes Franciscus Arfelengius, Plantinus of Law, the theologian of Leuven, Johannes Arlemius, or the professor of Paris, Gilbertus Tenebrardus, and another, the Spanish front, that has also produced long Spanish letters in defense of the Polyglot, written by the Spanish humanists Pedro Chacón, Juan Luis del Caño, and Fra Luis de Estrada. Below these visible heads, a dense network is built up with protectors, auxiliaries, and informants, including kings, cardinals, printers, and so on. To conclude, I would like to present this visualization on the reception of the Polyglot Bible, of the networks around the reception of the Polyglot Bible. The first thing I want to visualize is the name of all the people participating in this conflict, these networks. The red arrows indicate Spanish correspondence. The blue arrows, international correspondence. The color of the notes indicate profession. The yellow ones are scholars. The green notes are politicians or political authorities, and the white notes are ecclesiastical authorities. The main point I'm trying to make in my talk is that the arguments in defense and against the Polyglot Bible of Antwerp were elaborated and improved throughout a wide range of activities, including very high number of letters crossed by defenders and detractors of the original Hebrew text of the Bible. These opposing networks have their main nodes in Spain and in the Low Countries, and in my opinion, constitute a magnificent case study of one of the main provinces of the early modern European Republic of Letters. Thank you very much for your attention.